do have is a lockdown. You can't get in, you can't get out, you can't go up, you can't go down.
You know, we're living in awesome times. We're living in perilous times. Between the years 1970 and 1995, almost 900,000 people were killed in earthquakes around the world. That's amazing. I had no idea until I researched that recently. 900,000, almost 900,000 people. Also, I realized when I looked at it, every one of these countries were non-Christian countries. That's awesome also. You know, our country was once Protestant, and I believe that the freedoms and grace of God that we're still experiencing is the residue left over from this once Protestant country. But you know, our time is coming. Prophecies tell that. And it's set up. Did you know that 80% of America's population lives within 200 cities? 80% of our population lives within 200 cities. That's frightening. We, the people, are rapidly losing our freedoms. We're losing our liberties, we're losing our Bill of Rights, while at the same time our southern borders remain open. Why is that? Why are our leaders in Washington allowing that to happen? Let me give you a bit of interesting information that was revealed by the author Tupper Saucy. Tupper Saucy studied the 1992 Almanac of American Politics. He studied it, I think, for 2 or 3 months. And let me explain this. A congressional committee, from the way I understand it, is made up of people from the House and the Senate. It's a congressional committee. And there might be other formalities the way it's made up, but these congressional committees are the movers and the shakers in our government. And what Tupper Saucy found out in his research, as he researched the 1992 Almanac of American Politics, is that every congressional committee was chaired by a Roman Catholic. Think about that, friends. Things are wrapping up. I believe that almost every principle of our Constitution, as of Protestant and Republican government, has been repudiated. Think of that. That's awesome. God has given us some very specific and urgent warnings about these times. One of the most urgent calls is to come out of the cities and to move into the country and to the mountains. Do you realize that these warnings were given to us about 100 years ago? Let me read to you from a little book that I recommend every one of you get if you don't have it. I hope most of you have it. It's called Country Living. You can get it from the ABC, written by Ellen White. And I'll be reading a reference to you from page 31. Out of the cities, out of the cities. This is the message the Lord has given me. The earthquakes will come, the floods will come, and we are not to establish ourselves in the wicked cities, where the enemy is served in every way and where God is so often forgotten. The Lord desires that we shall have clear spiritual eyesight. Surely, those still living in the cities are living on borrowed times. We've been counseled to not move rashly, but we've been counseled to move. And also, we might hear from time to time people telling us, "Oh, don't you think you're being a little presumptuous as you're preparing to move from the cities out into the country or mountains?" Friends, to me, you're being presumptuous if you live in the cities, if you remain in the cities and don't move out into the country and into the mountains. The hardest part to many, I believe, is to break out of that typical routine they're in, to break out of the rat race. We were in that too, friends, and it was very difficult to break out of. The devil tried every way, he tried many ways to keep us from moving out. It was almost like we were in a deep anesthesia, like we were paralyzed. So I wanted to share that with you. So when you hear this message, ask for God's power and He'll help you overcome that. You know, there was another time about 3,500 years ago when God's people were commanded to do something. They were on their way to Canaan. Pharaoh's army was behind them, and the Red Sea was ahead of them. And they had nowhere to go. Let me read something else to you from Testimonies to the Church, Volume 4, and I'll read some excerpts from pages 25, 26, and 27. The divine command was, "Go forward." They were not to wait until the way was made plain and they could comprehend the entire plan of their deliverance. God's cause is onward. He will open a path before His people. To hesitate and murmur is to manifest distrust in the Holy One of Israel. The Hebrews were weary and terrified, yet if they had held back when Moses bade them advance, if they had refused to move nearer to the Red Sea, God would have never opened the path for them. In marching down to the very water, they showed that they had faith in the Word of God as spoken by Moses. They did all that it was in their power to do, and then the Mighty One of Israel performed His part and divided the waters to make a path for their feet. So that's what this presentation is all about, friends. I've been building for over 25 years, and I guess I can say about for the last 8 years, my family and I have had a real burden on our hearts to help God's people move out of the cities, out of the suburbs, into the country, into the mountains. In this presentation, we want to help you to follow God's instructions and to make haste wisely. To make haste wisely. This is a practical guide covering information that we pray will be useful to you as you begin this process. We want to discuss a number of possibilities that you can consider when looking for a home or land in the country. We'll discuss the pros and cons of various types of properties, whether the Lord shows you to rent or whether He shows you to buy an established homestead or to establish a homestead on raw land. We want to focus primarily, at least in this first presentation, on land and the location of that land. Location is so important, so we want to focus on that. We'll also touch on related subjects such as alternative energy sources, so you don't always have to depend on utility companies. No matter what route you decide to take, we hope this information will be a help to you. Remember, God didn't part the waters until the Israelites actually put their feet in the water. So why don't we get started? Let's go forward. Do as they did. Let's get our feet wet. The first and most important step in this process, friends, of leaving the cities, of breaking that gravitational pull of the cities, breaking the bonds, leaving the conveniences of the cities, is to pray earnestly and to pray much for God's direction. Along with this, God expects you to read and know His instructional books, the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy books. He will never, ever direct you contrary to His written word, friends. That's one constant and one guideline that we can all set our spiritual compasses by. God has told us that there are 3 ways in which He reveals His will to us to guide us. Do you know what those 3 ways are? It's found in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 512. Let's look at that and see what it says. There are 3 ways in which the Lord reveals His will to us, to guide us, and to fit us to guide others. How may we know His voice from that of a stranger? How shall we distinguish it from the voice of a false shepherd? God reveals His will to us in His Word, the Holy Scriptures. His voice is also revealed in His providential workings. Another way in which God's voice is heard is through the appeals of His Holy Spirit, making impressions upon the heart, which will be wrought out in the character. If you are in doubt upon any subject, you must first consult the Scriptures. So there you have the ways we are to look for God's leading in our lives, friends. Through the Holy Scriptures, through His providential workings, and through the appeals of the Holy Spirit. Friends, you must make this your first priority as you set your will to obey God's warnings and prepare to leave the cities and the suburbs for the relocation in the country and into the mountains. One other thing I'd like to share with you, and that is in the cities and almost everywhere nowadays, we can hardly discern God's voice because of all the distractions. Cell phones, regular phones ringing, people walking around and driving with cell phones in their ears. You hear radios booming, computers, traffic, sirens. You can't even go to fill up your car without having noise piped out to you at the gas pumps. Friends, if at all possible, you must eliminate these distractions. We must find a quiet place, even before we leave the cities, so that we can hear God's voice. Psalms 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Find your own quiet place amid the din of the city and talk to your Heavenly Father. Ask Him to reveal Himself to you as He has promised. Then spend time, not just a few moments, but close, real time with Him. Read in the Bible and in the Spirit of Prophecy for directions. Folks, this is an urgent situation. In 1910, our prophet said, "The time is near when large cities will be swept away." And in 1903, she said that thousands of cities would be destroyed, and also that, ere long, there would be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. That's found in Country Living, pages 8 and 11. This is deserving of your full attention. You must go to God individually, friends, for His specific directions for you as well as for your family. 1 Chronicles 12:32 describes the children of Issachar as being men that had an understanding of the times. It's so important, friends, that we as men and women have an understanding of the times in which we live. At the end of this presentation, we will share a few passages that have been wonderful to my family. But right now, here are a few inspired promises to give you hope. So now you have been commanded to go forward. Remember, the first step to make is the decision to set your will to obey. One of the next steps should be to assess your finances, that dreaded word, finances. But first of all, don't get discouraged. God did not say that only the folks with plenty of money were to leave the cities. If that were the case, I probably wouldn't be here. Let's read James 2:5 and see what that says. Hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he hath promised to them that love him? Isn't that beautiful? As you start to look over your financial situation, the question might come up, but how can I get out of the cities when I have so little money? You might be wondering what that answer is. Well, folks, I don't have the answer, but God does. He says that He will open the way for us. But He also adds an if to the promise. What is that if? Well, let's go back to the story of the Israelites at the Red Sea. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, pages 26 and 27. The Hebrews were weary and terrified. Yet if they had held back when Moses bade them advance, if they had refused to move nearer to the Red Sea, God would never have opened the path for them. In marching down to the very water, they showed that they had faith in the Word of God as spoken by Moses. They did all that it was in their power to do, and then the Mighty One of Israel performed His part and divided the waters to make a path for their feet. The voice of the Lord bidding His faithful ones go forward frequently tries their faith to the uttermost. But if they should defer obedience till every shadow of uncertainty was removed from their understanding, and there remained no risk of failure or defeat, they would never move on at all. I don't know exactly how God will make a way for you, friends. That's one of those faith-building processes that God takes us through individually. But we are to make the decision to go forward, to set our will to obey, and then do whatever we are able to do. You know, in my family situation, we saw doors open very soon after we made the firm decision to move. God uses many different ways to get us to the point of decision. And in our situation, once we had actually made that decision and began to get things ready to sell, and then started selling, and even selling the things that were very dear to us, then things began to open up for us. So that's something most people can do. Try to sell whatever you believe the Lord is leading you to sell. God knows exactly what you need to get rid of. Also, learn to downsize. Most of us have acquired a lot of what we might call stuff. When you sell your stuff, you come out ahead probably two ways. One way, of course, is financially or monetarily when you sell your stuff. And then also, when you make your move, you won't have to build such a large home to warehouse your stuff in. It's really wise, I think, friends, economically, to get rid of it as soon as you can. And then after that, with the belongings that are left over, try to separate that out even. And then you can build a storage house outside or on the property somewhere to store that in. And you won't take up that precious square footage inside your house. For those of you who can see no way financially, I want to mention a few things to you. I recommend that you begin thinking and praying about alternative ways to follow God's command, such as teaming up with someone who is financially able but may not be physically or otherwise able. Perhaps family members or fellow believers who are elderly or disabled in some way, but who are also wanting to leave the city and need help in moving and also need help in living in the country. Of course, always be careful in any type of partnership. All parties, friends, must be totally surrendered and selfless. They must be surrendered to the Lord and must know from Him what His will is for them. This is one of those areas where you really must take your individual situation to the Lord. And finally, I want to offer this hope to those whose financial assets are not large. There is a special blessing for you. For you is reserved the blessing of learning to experience real dependence on God financially. He never asks us to obey Him without providing a way. You can experience just how He'll provide your needs. At some point in time, friends, everyone who is faithful will have every earthly support cut off. That can be found in Desire of Ages 121 and 122. So, let's go forward and prove God's promises. Now let's get into some of the specifics involved in actually setting up your homestead in the country. Now folks, I'm going to try to cover a lot of territory in a fairly short time, so you'll need to use your pause button when we flash lists and maps up on the screen. Don't feel like you have to remember everything either. You can always refer back to this information later on if you need it. But right now, I want to start with a short overview of a way you can begin your process of relocating. First, I recommend making a list of the general location criteria that are important to you. And in that general location criteria, you can divide that up into 4 categories. The first being climate and topography. The next category would be demographics. The third would be available employment. And the fourth, the general mindset of the area that you'll be looking at. Now it's time for you to do some research and to look at various states and counties that fit the criteria that you're looking for, and also the criteria that the good Lord is showing you. The first place that I would look at would be the library, not only for the books that they have, which is a tremendous tool, of course, in researching, but also if you don't have internet access at home, libraries usually have computers with internet access. So I would count on that. Now, if you don't have a computer at home, you might not be familiar with the internet. A lot of times libraries have people that will show you how to do the internet, or they'll give you short courses in the evenings at some libraries to help you understand the internet. And believe me, folks, the internet is a tremendous tool in researching areas for relocating to. Now, another very important tool in helping you to research where you want to relocate to is the good old encyclopedia. And these World Book encyclopedias have a lot of valuable information on each state in the country. They'll have physical maps, they'll have climate data maps, they'll have population density maps, they even have road maps in here, as well as all other kind of information on each particular state. Another very important tool to get would be to get an atlas. And we believe that one of the best atlases that you can buy is the Delorme State Atlas. Delorme State Atlas. You can buy these at sporting goods stores, you can buy these at bookstores, of course. And the good thing about these atlases are that they will show you where forested areas are in the state that you're looking at. And that's very important when you need wood for firewood to keep warm, or if you want to harvest some of your trees to build outbuildings or whatever. Also, these maps are very good by giving information, topographical information. Also, they show you where water sources are in the state that you might be looking at. So I highly recommend these atlases. Also, just plain old road maps. Those of you who are members of AAA, Automobile Association of America, you'll know that you can get their maps free when you're a member. And you can get maps of every state in the nation if you're a member. And these are very good maps, so I recommend these. Also, a very good map to get of the area that you're looking at will be the National Forest Service maps. These are very valuable. They give information that the other maps might not carry. In these, they give you areas where there's public land and where there's private land. The public land is the land that we, the people, are supposed to own and the government manages. The private land is the land that individuals own, and that's usually indicated as being in white, whereas the public land is in green. Now, there are 2 very important books that I highly recommend having or getting for your research. The first one is How to Find Your Ideal Country Home by Jean Giroux. This is a very, very good book. It covers so many things in here. You'll just find it extremely valuable in finding and researching information on relocating. And then another book that I highly recommend is this book by Joel Skousen. It's called Strategic Relocation. And friends, this is full of very valuable information. I highly recommend this book. I want to mention that you can get the addresses and the names of these authors at the end of this presentation in the Sources and Resources department. I also want to mention too that these two authors are not Adventists, therefore they might not, probably don't, understand the prophecies as we should understand them, so keep that in mind when you look at these books, but they're extremely valuable. Okay, now, the next thing you should do is, after you've researched, to start narrowing down your choices to just as few choices as possible. Then, get additional information on these areas. And one thing I would do is look at the negative things of an area. In other words, when you narrow it down to a specific area, look to see if there are nuclear power plants in the area or upwind from the area you're looking at. Also, hazardous waste dumps. Also look to see if there's chemical weapons storage areas or depots in your area or upwind from your area. Also, military bases. Are there military bases nearby? Also, I would look to see if there's a reservation nearby with a casino. We know, or we've read about some folks that moved out to the country, or at least they thought they moved out to the country, and it was near a reservation which was out in the country, and the next thing they knew, a casino was built and thousands of people were coming out to the casino, and it was just like they moved from the city to the city. So beware of moving near a reservation. And then last in this area, I would mention, I would look or avoid states and counties that have high regulatory and oppressive building regulations. This is very important. They can be very intrusive. And folks, here at the end of time, this is what we don't need. As a general rule, I would say a poor county generally equates to a lower population, which generally equates to lower regulations. That's a good rule of thumb I think I would look at. Then, next, in getting additional information, I would subscribe to local newspapers and or little weekly advertising papers like penny pincher type papers that come out. A lot of times there's valuable information that you can glean from these, and most of the time these papers have their own website on the net, so you might not even have to subscribe. You can just get on the internet and get it. But with these, they'll give you a feel of the area. Now, so far, what I've recommended to do, you can do this without even having to leave home, unless you had to go to the library. Now, the next and final thing in this overview I recommend doing is to drive to the area that you're interested in. And while you're in that area, there's a few things that I recommend doing. That is talking to realtors in the area. And when I say talking to realtors, I would look for a realtor that specializes in rural land. I think you'll get a lot further, a lot quicker with a realtor that specializes in rural land. Also, I'd talk with business people. I would talk with the local people, particularly if you narrow down a part of the county that you want to move to. I would talk with the local people in that area. And then last, I would mention talking with the county extension office. You know, we are all needing to grow gardens to be able to survive in the future when we can't buy or sell. And a county extension office is very valuable in helping you to know what can be grown in the county, what part of the county grows what, and I think most counties will allow you to bring soil in, and they can test your soil and tell you the nutrient status of your soil. So a county extension office is very valuable. Now, once you've done all of these things that we've just briefly covered, then folks, you're ready to start looking at individual pieces of land. Now, later on, we will go into the how-tos in looking at land. Okay, let's go back to the original list of general location criteria and look at the first division, climate and topography. Let's look at this first map. We're going to start out very basic here. This map shows the main climatic regions of the country. Notice there are areas that you might have thought would be very cold that are actually moderated by huge mountain ranges and ocean currents, among other things. Now let's consider rainfall. We all know that rainfall is very important. Water is crucial to sustaining life. And precipitation can be affected drastically by topography. Take, for instance, the Cascade Mountains. On the western slopes of the Cascade Mountains, they get a tremendous amount of rain coming in from the Pacific Ocean. And the mountains seem to stop the inflow of rain clouds, where they'll get up to 100 inches of rain on the western slopes. But you can go a short distance on the other side of the slopes, the eastern side, and they'll only get up to 6 inches annually of rainfall. So there can be a drastic difference in rainfall due to topography. Now, let's look at an annual precipitation map. This map shows the average annual precipitation in inches. Bear in mind that, generally speaking, west of the Great Plains, most of the precipitation comes during the winter, as opposed to the east that gets precipitation throughout the year. I want to make a note here. When you see a website at the bottom of the map, we put it there so you can go to that particular site to get a more clear picture for your close examination. Now, you know that precipitation does affect snowfall in the northern part of the region. So let's go to an annual snowfall map. You can see areas of light gray in the Rocky Mountains and Cascade Mountains. These areas get the most snow. Going down from there, depending on the tint of your TV screen, would be purple, bright pink, dark blue to light blue, dark green to light green, and ending with yellow, getting very little snow. Another category of climate and topography is elevation. This is one of the most important factors in snowfall. Elevation also affects climate, and particularly temperature. For every 1,000 feet of elevation you go up, the temperature drops 3.3 degrees in Fahrenheit. Now, friends, this can drastically affect your garden and your orchard, your fruit trees. And that's very important to have plenty of food in the coming days for God's people. Let's go to Country Living and read pages 9 and 10. Again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country, where they can raise their own provisions. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. Now let's look at the plant hardiness map. One factor to consider in raising fruit trees is how cold your area can get in the middle of winter. The plant hardiness zone map you're looking at shows the average annual minimum temperature you can expect. When you narrow down to the area that you're going to look at more closely, check with the local nurseries and the county extension office to get more detailed information on your area of interest. Now let's look at the freeze-free period map. This map basically shows the length of growing seasons throughout the country. This particular map is so minutely detailed that you might not be able to read it on your screen. So once again, you can go to the website at the bottom of your screen if you need to. We just wanted you to know that there is a map available with this type of information. Now the next category under climate and topography is sunshine. We all know that sunshine affects our health positively for the most part, and also our mental health. But you know, it also affects our ability to generate electricity from the sun. Let's go to the average daily solar radiation map for June. This map shows that the most solar radiation is represented by the beige-colored area. Next is yellow, and then green. Now let's look at the daily solar radiation map for December. And looking at the suitability of an area for using a solar power system, this is the most important map of the two, as it will show the solar radiation received during the darkest time of the year. Folks, there is a price to pay. The more sun you have, the less precipitation you'll have. And it's very hard to do without either one of those. By the way, the less precipitation you have, the less forestation, or the fewer trees that you'll have on your property, which means less possibility of getting firewood to keep warm in the future. It's very hard to do without either one of these, so I sure recommend trying to reach a balance. Now, the next category in our general location criteria is demographics. And in this, our first topic we're going to take up is probably almost as important as finding water on your property, and that is to find an area that has a low density, low population density. Let's go to our first map on that. Population density by county, which is put out by the U.S. Census Bureau. This map shows the population per square mile by county. The darkest colored counties are the most heavily populated. Okay, let's look at the next map that shows the population distribution for the United States in the year 2000. This map is made up of tiny dots. Each tiny dot represents 7,500 people. Now, we're not talking about the conglomeration of dots in the metropolitan areas. People are where the lights are. Here is Atlanta, and now you can see Dallas and Fort Worth, and now Minneapolis, St. Paul, and now Denver, and Seattle. Now usually the fewer the people in an area, the more liberty and freedom you will experience and have in that area. Our next category under demographics is reasons why high population density means instability in a crisis. Under this heading, we could put excessive specialization. This means there could be a presence of highly specialized and trained people that might not have the ability to take care of their basic needs in a crisis. Also, you could have massive food and water requirements. Now that's self-explanatory, but let's take it a step further. The authorities could use that to manipulate and control people, and that could be a disaster. Let's look at 5th manuscript release, page 305. In India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and will result in a civil war. There will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. Next is financial dependence. Most of us buy our basic needs and supplies with money, especially those in the cities, while those in the country can raise part of their basic needs, maybe even a good part of their basic needs. So in a crisis, those in the city would be in a terrible bind. There would be bank runs, and that would be just the beginning. Next is the potential for massive epidemics due to the increased contact with others. Next would be the potential for impaired movement or no movement at all. You know, we had a cousin in California who used to be on the sheriff's department in a certain county, and he told us about the time years back when California had a massive blackout. He said the interstates were absolutely jammed. You couldn't even go anywhere. He said the U.S. highways were almost as bad. You could hardly go anywhere on those. And then the state highways were almost as bad as that. And it wasn't until you got down to the tertiary or the county roads that you could really start moving around on. A friend 10 to 15 years ago once mentioned he was stationed in a city that had a population of about 150,000 people. And he was in the National Guard. And he mentioned the plans that the Guard had to completely cordon off that city within about 20 minutes in time of crisis. So folks, if the Guard had plans to do that for cities of 150,000 people 10 to 15 years ago, think what they're planning on doing now, especially with the presence of Homeland Security. Let's turn to Country Living, page 11. But ere long, there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. We must be preparing for these issues. This is the light that is given me. Maybe this is a good time to ask the question, how far away from the city should we relocate? Maybe we should ask another question. Have we been given any counsel on this? Well, we do have indications from the Spirit of Prophecy. That should give us an idea. Let me refer you to a website you can see at the bottom of the screen. You can go to it to read it for yourself. The reference is found in the booklet, Out of the Cities, on page 17, step 4, in the section titled, Taking the Next Step. Friends, even researchers who are not of our faith, who have studied what would most likely happen during times of crisis and civil unrest, have recommended that you locate your home not less than 1 tank full of gas away from any major city. A word to the wise should be sufficient. Avoid states with over 100 people per square mile, preferably below 50 people per square mile. But if you get down to 20 or below people per square mile, it could be pretty hard to find work, especially if your job depended on a population base. Look for an area that tends to be more self-sufficient in supplying life's necessities, such as farmlands, and especially areas that have sufficient water. Water is crucial. Look for a state that has lower taxes. And like I said before, a state that has fewer regulations. But beware, a state that has no income tax could indicate that they make up for it by having higher sales tax and or property taxes. Look at the local regulations in the area that you're interested in. Look at the building codes. Look at the planning and zoning departments. Hopefully they won't have a planning and zoning department. The poorer counties a lot of times don't even have those departments. The next section in the general location criteria is available employment. Many companies are allowing their employees to work at their home. We have some very dear friends who decided to leave the city and move to the country, move to the mountains. And one of them was going to quit their job. And the company, the Lord blessed them so much that the company told them that they wanted them to stay on and to work out of their home, and went so far as to run a long distance line to their home, so it would be a local call to the headquarters of the company. There's also cottage industries. Many are working out of their homes to craft marketable products. You can also be, of course, self-employed or have a home business. This will give you the maximum control of your spiritual environment. And friends, isn't that what it's all about here at the end of time? When we don't have much time left to be in control of our spiritual environment? You know, it's getting harder and harder to be a true Christian while being employed by others. The ethical issues are getting worse and worse. Another way of employment is having a business online out of your home. Now, I recommend that you look at Sources and Resources, the section at the end of this presentation, where we have listed books that give ideas on employment from your country home. Now, we'll go to the last section of the general location criteria, and that's the general mindset of the area that you're looking at. But first, let's go to Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 110. Lot chose Sodom for his home because he saw that there were advantages to be gained there from a worldly point of view. But after he had established himself and grown rich in earthly treasure, he was convinced that he had made a mistake in not taking into consideration the moral standing of the community in which he was to make his home. The dwellers in Sodom were corrupt. Vile conversation greeted his ears daily, and his righteous soul was vexed by the violence and crime he was powerless to prevent. His children were becoming like these wicked people, for association with them had perverted their morals. Taking all these things into consideration, the worldly riches he had gained seemed small and not worth the price he had paid for them. This is a very important consideration, friends. This is also one aspect that is not so easily known. Visit the area that you've narrowed your prospects down to. Observe the local people. Observe local bulletin boards. Observe local newspapers. Is there a prevalence of bars and casinos, etc. in the area? Then ask the Lord to show you anything that you need to see in the area. And friends, He'll give you discernment. The criteria that we've just covered, as important as it is, should not be used as the only factor in your decision. God's leading must always be number one in the equation. Often the Lord uses human instrumentalities such as the information we've just covered as His means of guiding and directing us. But keep in mind, friends, that He might lead you to a situation you would never have chosen from looking at the statistics. Just remember, He knows best. Always obey God's leading, even if it doesn't make sense to you right now. In wrapping up this segment, let's look at Patriarchs and Prophets, page 126. In reference to the call of Abraham, quote, "It was no light test that was thus brought upon Abraham, no small sacrifice that was required of him. There were strong ties to bind him to his country, his kindred, and his home. But he did not hesitate to obey the call. He had no question to ask concerning the land of promise, whether the soil was fertile and the climate healthful, whether the country afforded agreeable surroundings, and would afford opportunities for amassing wealth. God had spoken, and His servant must obey. The happiest place on earth for him was the place where God would have him to be."
Open my eyes that I may see glimpses of truth Thou hast for me. Place in my hand the wonderful key, the key that shall unclasp and set me free. Silently now I wait for Thee. Ready, my God. Open my ears that I may hear voices of truth thou sendest clear. And while the wave notes fall on my ear, everything false will disappear. Silently now I wait for thee, ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my ears, illumine me, Spirit divine. Open my mouth and let me bear gladly the truth every way. Open my heart, and let me prepare. Love with thy children, thus love to share. Silently now I wait for thee. Ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my heart, and illumine me. Open my heart, and set me free. Set me free. Set me free.
Now we're ready to go forward and discuss how and what to look for on a piece of land. To begin with, let's get focused so we can see what the practical reasons are for setting up our homes in the country or in the mountains. This should help us to make wise decisions in purchasing a home or land. You know, in our high-tech, highly specialized, mostly urban culture, most people have gotten very used to depending on others for their basic needs. Most people in this country today would have little or no idea how to provide for life's necessities if they were suddenly thrust into a situation where they had to. Whether you're already situated in a rural location or whether you're just beginning the process of relocating, I hope that the information we're about to cover will help you to set up your home in such a way that you'll not only be able to survive and function in a crisis, but that you'll be able to help others also. If you're just starting the process of relocating, hopefully you'll quickly narrow down your areas of interest, and then your next step is to begin looking at specific properties. I want to mention here that if you're still in the valley of decision about relocating, time, friends, is of the essence. I believe that for some time now an exodus from the cities to the mountains has been going on, and good mountain land is becoming increasingly difficult to find at good prices. But no matter whether you're looking at an established homestead or whether you're looking at raw land to improve, the criteria you'll want to look for should be the same no matter which route you go. The land should be a place where you're able to provide for your family's basic needs. Before we cover these basic needs and criteria, I want to go over a few terms. On the grid is a term coined to indicate when a home is connected to an electric power company. Now, another term that I'll be using is alternative energy system, or alternative energy. An alternative energy system is any system you set up to generate your own electricity independent of a power company, whether it be using the sun for a solar electric system, a mountain creek for a hydroelectric system, or a gas or diesel generator, or any of these combinations. Now, let's talk about some of the major basic necessities. In this section, we'll cover water, warmth, shelter, food, sanitation, power, and surroundings. Now let's go back to water. In the city, you depend upon someone else to supply you with ample water that is supposed to be safe to use. But what if a crisis interrupts this water supply, or what if it isn't safe to drink? How long can you survive without water, friends? Let's look at what you can do to change that situation by setting up a place away from the city where you can be in charge of your own water supply. Water probably is the most important physical feature that you can look for on land. And water could come in various forms on your land. It can come in the form of a well, of a spring head, of a mountain creek. A well and a spring or spring head are usually pure, but I recommend getting it tested anyway. And a mountain creek, I would filter the drinking water and the cooking water. Let's look at the ideal setup, and that would be a system that would deliver pressurized water to your cabin or home without using power. There are several possibilities I'd like to look at. The first is called the gravity flow system. This is where you find an ample supply of water, a minimum of 50 to 60 feet above the building site. Remember this rule: for every 2 feet that you go up in elevation looking for water, you're going to wind up with approximately 1 pound of water pressure. So, if you find an ample supply of water around 60 feet above the building site, you're going to wind up with approximately 30 pounds of water pressure in your house. Now, to me, this is the best system that you can have, because there's virtually nothing mechanical in it, nothing to go wrong. Now remember, on the north side of the slope, it's usually more moist, less sun, but consequently that means a shorter growing season. Now, another situation to look at is a creek or a stream at or below the elevation of your building site. Now, it doesn't take any electricity to get water from that situation pressurized into your house. And one of the major ingredients of this is called a ram pump. A ram pump does not use electricity at all. Now, we'll go into ram pumps, Lord willing, in our next presentation. Now, remember, any surface water, any springs or creeks that you have, be sure and check them during the driest time of the year, especially if they're a small stream or creek. A well. Most people living in the country live on wells, and they're wonderful ways to get water if you don't have surface water. Especially nowadays when they're making efficient pumps that work very well on alternative energy systems. When you're looking at a piece of property and it doesn't have any surface water, a spring or a creek, check with the neighbors to see how deep their wells are. And you can also check with a local well driller. He'll probably have an idea how deep you have to go to get water in that area, and then that can give you an idea of how much a well will cost to be drilled there. friends, there are many possibilities that we can run into. Every piece of land is different, so we can't cover that in this presentation. But in our next presentation, we will cover more combinations that I hope will help you. Now, let's look at warmth. The ability to keep warm would certainly rank among the more important of life's basic necessities. In the city, typically you depend on the utility companies to provide heat for you. But friends, what if there's an extended blackout? Even if you had a fireplace, where would you get the wood supply that you'd need to stay warm? You know, fireplaces are very inefficient and take an awful lot of wood. So, it's only wise to provide for this need as you move to the country. Is there an ample supply of timber on the property that you're looking at? In addition to staying warm, there are other uses that you can use timber for. For instance, to cook with, also to heat water with. We know that the time is coming when we can't buy or sell. We can't buy propane to cook with. We can't buy electricity if you're on the grid. And it's very necessary to have an ample supply of wood to do all of these necessities. You might ask this question, well, how much timbered land do we need? Let's go to a little bulletin called Woodlot Management. This is put out by Story Communications or Story Publishing, and we'll have the information in Sources and Resources on how to order these bulletins. In this little booklet, it gives some information about how much timbered land you do need. So let's turn to page 3 and see what they say. Even with a relatively small woodlot, you can produce enough wood to heat your home forever. Exactly how small it can be depends on the energy efficiency and size of your home and the efficiency of your stove. The average modern house in a northern climate can now be heated year-round with only 3 to 8 cords. The growth rate per acre in most forests is between 1/4 and 3/4 of a cord per year, depending in part on the climate, soil, kinds of trees, and the degree of management. In short, a carefully managed woodlot need be only 5 acres or more to give you year-round fuel for heating and cooking. One more thing I'd like to mention, and that is the phrase selective logging or selectively logged. That generally means that the majority of the timber has been removed. It hasn't been clear cut, but the majority has been removed. The value of the timber has been removed. This means that the price of the property should be less expensive because of that. Now, let's talk about what you'll do for shelter when you relocate to the country or the mountains. At some point, you'll want to think about whether you should look for an established home, either one that's in real good shape and ready for you to move in, or one that's a fixer-upper. If you're a good handyman and have a discerning eye, I think a fixer-upper could be a good plan, especially if it's a temporary step to your retreat. Or you may want to look for raw land that you can develop yourself and customize your own homestead. To me, if you can afford it, that is by far the most fun. In this case, there are 2 main routes that you could go. The fastest would be to put a new or used mobile home on the property. The other way to go with raw land is to build a place from the ground up, just as you'd like it. Going this route, I believe you'd end up with a sturdier home, which is something to really consider with all the storms, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, tornadoes, and other disasters increasing. You know, mobile home residents are usually the first to be evacuated when disasters such as hurricanes are expected to be coming through. That's something to keep in mind also. In the case of building a new home versus buying an established one, naturally, you should have much fewer repairs for quite some time in a brand new home. This could be important, especially in times when it becomes difficult to buy and sell. Let's look at temporary housing now. While you're remodeling your fixer-upper or if you're constructing a new home, you very possibly will need some temporary housing. So let's look at a few ways that you can go. The first route that you could take would be to buy a new or used mobile home and put it on the property. You could set it up temporarily where you could live there while you're building or remodeling and then move it off later, or of course you could set it up permanently where you could leave it there after you move into your new home and use it as guest quarters later on. Now another route or option you could take would be to build a small cabin or a small building that you could live in. You wouldn't have to finish it completely. It would just be a temporary quarter for you and your family while you're building or remodeling. And then after you move in, you could use it finish it off later if you wanted to, and use it as a guest cottage or storage building later on. Then also you could get an RV and set it up where it would be permanent. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, or it'd be temporary. Now, with all three of these options that I've just mentioned, remember you're going to need a source of water, your water set up, power set up, and also your waste disposal or septic tank system or some type of septic system. I remember reading in the manual of a very good quality travel trailer company, and it was an old manual, but it really stuck out in my mind. And they were talking about setting up a temporary septic system for an RV. And this is what they described. They called it a gopher hole, and that they described the gopher hole as being approximately 36 inches in diameter, about 3 or 4 feet deep, and that you'd run your black water pipe into the hole and then get you a half a sheet of plywood, a 4x4 piece of plywood, put it on top, and the dirt that you dug out of the hole, you can take part of that dirt and drop it around the outer edges of that plywood to seal the gopher hole, and you'd have a temporary septic tank. Take a look at this idea about setting up an RV. One of the things that a number of God's people are being impressed to do as they set up their places in the country and in the mountains, whether or not they have an RV themselves, is to prepare an RV site with hookups for others who may come to join them and need a place to stay. With a little thought and preparation, and really not much money, you can be in a wonderful position to be a help and a blessing to others. All you would need to do is to hook into the main water system of your home, hook into the septic tank system, and into the electrical system, and then you're ready to be a refuge to God's people in troublous times. Before we go any further, and especially before you buy any property, friends, I highly recommend that you go to the courthouse and research these topics. Covenants. Are there any covenants that pertain to the property you're looking at? If you're moving out far enough, there shouldn't be, but it's always wise to check. Are there any easements on your property, on the property that you're looking at? Are there laws about subdividing the property that you're looking at? There might come a time in the future that you might want to subdivide, sell off one piece of your land. You want to know if there are any laws that would forbid you to do that. Building codes. Are there building codes in your county? If so, what kind of building codes? Are there inspections required? If so, inspections on what aspect of your construction process? Are there zoning laws? If so, what kind of zoning laws? Does the property you're looking at have solid legal access? You don't want to buy land that is landlocked. That means property that does not have an easement or a right-of-way that allows you to go in and out of your property. Also check and research at the courthouse the title. Make sure it's clear. And finally, check to see if you would own the timber, the mineral, and the water rights on this property. If you don't feel confident in researching all this or part of this at the courthouse, I would get the help of a realtor, a local realtor, especially a realtor that is known to deal in rural areas, rural property. And I think the best thing to do would be to get legal advice. Go to a real estate lawyer, and he would be probably the best route to take. The next basic necessity that we're going to look at now is food. In the city, most people depend on the corporations that run the grocery stores to provide for their food needs for the next day or week, as a general rule. In the country, as our prophet told us over and over again, we can grow our own provisions. She said, in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. Now you can find that in Country Living, page 9 and 10. Folks, if you're looking at a homestead that's already established, it may already have a prepared garden site or even a mature orchard. That would be a real plus because it generally takes between 3 and 5 years for a newly planted fruit tree to begin producing. But if you're looking to create your own homestead, it's helpful to know that successful gardens and orchards are directly related to topography and microclimates. Now, we've already covered regional climatic considerations, and what we want to look at is factors for a specific area in the county that you're looking at land in. As we mentioned before, I highly recommend talking to the local county extension office and talk with them about these following subjects. Microclimates. Microclimates for the part of the county that you're looking at. The growing seasons in that county. Soils in that part of the county. And what grows in the area that you're looking at. One of the major factors in being able to grow your own provisions is the length of the growing season. Now, we've already looked at the effect that elevation has on the length of a growing season. Let's look at microclimates. A microclimate is where a particular area has a different climate or different climatic conditions than the immediate surrounding area. For instance, if you hear somebody say, oh, that's a banana belt over there, that could mean that it is consistently a few degrees or 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the immediate surrounding area. Also, you might hear somebody refer to an area, particularly in the north, that an area is a snow belt. Naturally, that would mean that that little microclimate area gets more snow than maybe the areas around it, as close as 5 to 10 miles away. Now, most of us realize that air rises, hot air rises, and inversely, cold air goes down. So in the fall and in the spring, when the evening air starts to cool down, you have a tumbling effect or a movement of cold air going down the side of a mountain and sinking or settling in the valley floor. What this usually means is you have shorter growing seasons in the valley floors. So friends, you want to stay out of the valleys when it comes to wanting the longest growing season, but also you don't want to get too high either. Now, when you're choosing your garden plot, be sure and take this into consideration. You want to have a garden plot that will allow a natural flow or drainage away and down the hill from your garden plot. That could give you many more days of a growing season. I'd like to read something to you from a wonderful book entitled The New Organic Grower by Eliot Coleman. Let's see what he has to say on page 10. Plants and gardens need to breathe fresh air. A low area with no air movement is undesirable for a number of reasons. Stagnant air encourages fungus diseases, holds air pollutants around plants, and stays colder on frosty nights. The last is an important consideration because cold air, which is heavier than warm air, flows down slope and collects in hollows and valleys. A farm in such a location is at a great disadvantage. Conversely, one on a hillside or near the top of a slope is better protected from frost because the cold air of late spring and early fall flows down the hillside and settles in the valley. In many cases, this cold air drainage can result in a longer, frost-free growing season of 2 and even 3 weeks at both ends of the season. Of course, the land does not want to be so sloped that it is either difficult to farm or is subject to erosion. Actually, a flat area on the edge of a slope enjoys as much air drainage as the top of the slope does and is probably the ideal situation. There's something else we need to look at from Mr. Coleman's book, and that is information concerning the slope of your land, the slope of the land where you're going to put your garden plot. Let's look at page 9 and read what he says. The lay of the land in most of the northern half of the United States is a very important factor. Land with a southern aspect has a number of advantages. A southern exposure warms up sooner in the spring. The more perpendicular a slope is to the angle of the sun, the faster it warms up. Land in the northern hemisphere at about 43 degrees latitude, the northern border of Massachusetts, Illinois, or California, that slopes 5 degrees to the south is actually in the same solar climate as level land 300 miles to the south. A southwestern slope is preferable to a southern or southeastern slope. On a southwestern slope, less direct radiation is required to evaporate dew or frost in the early morning, and more is available for absorption once the initial daily warming has occurred. However, in this, as in other areas, a compromise may have to be made. Another major factor that we need to consider in growing your own food is the soil. This is critical for a good garden, friends. Generally, the only area that you need to be concerned with on your property is the garden plot. Poor soil can generally be improved depending on the amount of time and work and money that you want to put into it. I highly recommend as soon as you purchase your property and have the closing that you choose where the garden plot is going to be. Take a sample of that into a local garden store that tests soil or into your local county extension office and let them show you what deficiencies your soil might have. Then you can start working on that right away. One other thing I want to mention is be sure and section off enough land for your garden plot and orchard so you'll have enough for you and your family and maybe more. You don't know who the Lord is going to bring to your property in the future, so you want to plan for that. Now, let's look at the next section. That's sanitation. We all realize the importance of being able to use our sinks, our bathtubs, and our commodes. And in order to do that, we must have a good septic tank system. And in order to have a good septic tank system, we must have good percolation, or perk. Now, the term percolation means that a soil has the physical ability of absorbing liquids, or in this case, liquid wastes. And that liquid waste would be flowing from the septic tank into the leach field or bleeder line system, which would be reabsorbed back into the earth. Now folks, if you don't have good adequate percolation, then you're going to be in for a mess. And because of this, most counties require that perk tests be performed on the land where the septic tank system is going to be installed, and that soil reach a certain requirement of percolation in order to satisfy that county's requirements. And so it's most important that when you're having the contract drawn up for the purchase of the land, that you have a contingency included in the contract that the soil or the land perk in the general vicinity of the building site. Now this is most important to have this done. You don't want it to perk 200-300 yards away and not perk there at the house. That would be extremely expensive. It could perk up the hill from your house, and that would get quite costly. And that's just a situation you wouldn't want to have. Also, before the closing, you want to be sure that you see the perk tests that the percolation engineers ran. And also you want to see the perk holes in the earth that they dug to perform that perk test. You want to be sure those holes are in the general vicinity of where you're going to have the home built. Something else to consider is if you decide to put an RV site in, RV hookups like we just talked about, if your RV hookups are not going to be near the main septic tank system, you might want to consider having a perk test done near the future RV hookups so you can have a small septic tank system there. Our next section that we're going to cover now is power. Although power might not be considered to be one of life's basic necessities, it certainly makes life easier, and most of us would have a pretty tough time functioning without it. So, why not set up your homestead in a way that you'll not be shut down or shut off by a power company when a crisis or a disaster hits? Let's look at various reasons why you might want to have your own alternative energy system. One of the major reasons I would want one is because I would not want to be dependent on a utility company or a power company, especially looking ahead at the days that are fast approaching. Let's look at the home or apartment that you live in right now. You're probably on a municipal water system, and for you to receive water pressure or have water pressure at your home or apartment, there has to be huge electric water pumps at the municipal plant. Imagine what would happen if there was an extended blackout in your area or region. Now granted that they probably do have backup diesel generators, but friends, what would happen when the diesel ran out? Let's consider the heat in your apartment or home. Most of you realize that if you lose power, that your electric furnace, electric central furnace system will not operate. But did you know that if your system operates on propane or natural gas, that if you lose electricity, the blower that forces the heated air throughout your house will also shut down? And then also, those of you who have fireplaces, they are a backup, but fireplaces, friends, are extremely inefficient compared to the modern airtight wood stoves. And it might heat a room or two depending on the size of your home, but it would take a mountain of wood to keep you warm and going for an extended period of time during the winter time. Now, let's look at food. You know that if there's a blackout, you better start eating pretty fast, because what you don't eat is probably going to spoil real soon in the refrigerator and in the freezer. And maybe some of you in the cities and in the suburbs have already been through blackouts, so you have a pretty good idea how fast the grocery shelves can empty in a matter of days, if not hours. Now there's sanitation. To put it briefly, friends, if you don't have water, you don't have water to drink if you drink the tap water. You don't have water to flush the commode with, and you don't have water to bathe. Let's take a look at the subject of easements. When there's an easement agreement on a property, that agreement gives to another individual or group, whoever they may be, the legal right to have access to come onto that particular property. Utility companies such as telephone companies and power companies, etc., require easements before they will run their services to your home. This reminds me of an incident that happened years ago when we moved from a suburb out into the country. I had worked with the engineer of the power company that we were going to hook up to, and I was, one particular day, several months after we'd moved in, I was outside working in the front lawn, and we believe in gates, friends, and we had left our gate open that particular day. And all of a sudden I heard a truck coming in, and I looked up, and I noticed it was this engineer that I'd worked with, and he was a nice fellow, and I walked over to his truck and asked him if I could help him or what he needed, and he said, "Oh no," he said, "I'm just out checking for dry rotted insulators." Now friends, insulators on power poles used to be made out of glass, and nowadays I understand they make them out of ceramic material. And most of us realize that ceramic material does not dry rot, or deteriorate in any way. In addition to that, the system, the power lines, and the insulators were only a few months old, so there's no way any of this could have happened. Now friends, I believe that this particular man was merely curious, but used his company's legal right of access to satisfy his curiosity. But the potential for more serious easement abuse is there, and in fact, a program was actually introduced into Congress according to a July 14, 2002 article in the Washington Times, whereby 1 million letter carriers, utility workers, and other individuals whose jobs allow them access to private homes would be used as a domestic informant in a planned volunteer informant corps. Although this particular program was not passed, many believe that the principle of this program is being implemented in other ways. This was somewhat confirmed to me, I'd say a couple of weeks ago, when I was talking with a representative of a utility company. I asked him about this program, and he said, "No, I've never heard of any such thing." But then, as I continued to talk to him about this, he told me that, their company workers had gone through a class or a session of some kind where the county sheriff had spoken to them about specific things to look for when on a private property that they should report. So, what we have here, friends, is a situation with tremendous potential for use against God's true people in the days ahead. One other thing I want to mention before we leave this little story. It's very difficult to have easements removed once they have been signed for. A word to the wise is sufficient. Now, another reason for having alternative energy is the fact that once you have it established, once you've put the money up front for it, the monthly cost of operating it could be just a fraction of what it would cost if you were on the grid. Let's look at land that does not have power running to it. As you're looking for land, you might find just the perfect piece of land that fits the criteria you had listed, except there might not be any power running to it. Now, when you find land like that, usually the land is less expensive because depending on how far away the power lines stop from the property, it could cost thousands of dollars to continue those power lines to the property you're looking at. So friends, why not take that money that you were going to put into the power company to run the power lines to that property and put it into your own power company, your own alternative energy system, and enjoy the benefits of that. We've been off the grid for several years now, or more than that actually, and if there has been a power outage in our area, we had no idea, because when you own your own power company, you don't have that problem. Now, let's look at the various types of alternative energy that you might need to consider. This depends on the property that you're looking at and your budget. Let's next consider a hydroelectric generation system. As you're looking at various pieces of land and you're considering the resources of each piece of land and how each piece of land relates to an alternative energy system, hydroelectric generation is probably the most important system to be familiar with in looking at land. If you find a piece of land and it has a nice creek flowing across it, if the creek is flowing at least where a 4-inch pipe cannot handle the flow, and if there's a minimum of 10 to 15 feet of drop in the creek from the time it enters the property to the time that it leaves the property, that piece of property is a pretty good candidate to have hydroelectric generation. Now, it's very important, if you do find a piece of property like that, if at all possible, if it fits into your time schedule, to check that creek or stream at the driest time of the year. That is the most restrictive time of the year to check. You want to be sure you have enough flow at the driest time. Now, hydro is probably the most reliable of all the alternative energy systems. It is also, I'd say, one of the least expensive of all the alternative energy systems. But don't despair, friends. If you find property that fits your criteria, everything is just right, except it doesn't have a creek, that's no major problem. There are other wonderful ways to have an alternative energy system. And that leads us to solar electric generation. We're not going to cover the technical aspects of solar alternative energy in this presentation. What we want to look at is what you should be looking for when you're looking at land. And that is, you should be looking for land that has plenty of exposure to the sun year-round. For instance, if you're buying a piece of property on the side of a mountain, you want to be sure that land is on the southern slope, the southern side of that mountain, or somewhere near that. Another thing to consider also is if there's a mountain directly to the south of you, you want to be sure that the sun is not blocked by that mountain when the sun goes by or arcs by very low in the sky in the middle of winter. In our next presentation, we'll be looking more into alternative energy, the technical aspects of it, hybrid systems, which include or can include a generator, battery bank to store the energy in, an inverter, all this in conjunction with solar and or hydroelectric. Now, let's discuss surroundings. Our surroundings have a lot to do with our quality of life. So we'll take it up as one of our criteria also. Surroundings contribute greatly to our spiritual, mental, and physical health. My father-in-law, who was a physician, had a wonderful prescription for some of his patients. It was a prescription for large doses of calm. What a necessary antidote for stresses and anxieties that most people experience these days. Needless to say, country living also is usually beautiful to the eye, and that can bring great pleasure and health too. This section will also cover the need for personal privacy. As time goes on, friends, it will become more and more obvious why we are counseled to locate where the houses are not crowded closely together and where you'll be free from the interference of enemies. That's found in Country Living, page 20. In Psalms 27, 11 and 12, David wrote, "Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies." Now, friends, notice what the marginal reading is for the word enemies. It says, "those which observe me." Now, I'd like to reread this again. "Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of those which observe me." Then David goes on to say, "For false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty." Isn't that interesting in light of the times we're living in, friends? Also, in regard to surroundings, we found a most interesting article about a piece of land that James and Ellen White bought for themselves back in the 1800s. Ellen wrote a letter to her son Willie describing the property, the water, the timber, etc. Then she said, "We must have a place of retirement where we can step out of doors without being seen by our neighbors." There is great wisdom in this, friends. A word to the wise is sufficient. One factor to consider in the degree of remoteness that you choose is access. Is the road or driveway that leads to the property you're looking at maintained by the county? If this property is up north in snow country, how close will the county plow the road to your property? In other words, how much of the road to your property are you going to be responsible to clear? Now, let's look at physical considerations of the road or driveway leading to your property. First of all, is it on the north side of the slope? Remember earlier in this presentation we told you the north side will tend to be more moist, and what that will also carry over into is in the wintertime it will hold ice longer, and up north it will hold snow longer. So you want to be sure it's best not to have a driveway on the north part of a slope if at all possible. It can get very muddy also in the springtime. Is the driveway or road leading to your property steep? What will it be like in icy weather? Also, does the road cross over a creek? If that's the case, ask the question or ask people in the area, does it usually wash out in the springtime? Now, let's consider the proximity of the property to work. How far are you willing to drive to work? How far are you willing to drive to town for necessary supplies? Any of these access situations I've just described could be a plus if limited access restricts the growth of the area. But just make sure that you can get in and out all times of the year. Don't let these things discourage you, friends. The benefits of living in an area with many assets, including large doses of calm, can be tremendous. But you just need to check these factors so that you can make wise decisions and can have the right equipment to enable you to enjoy all these benefits. While we're talking about the benefits of living in the mountains and in the rural areas, to me the most wonderful blessing that you can experience is the joy of being a part of winning a precious soul to Christ. Isn't that what life is all about, friends? You know, there are numerous ways that you can witness from the country, the rural areas. I'll name just a couple right now. One is to be a part of a bulk mailing of truth-filled books to your region or to other regions of the country. Another way of witnessing would be to air prophecy seminars on radio and TV stations, or to use a micro FM broadcaster to broadcast to your immediate area. These are just a few of the possibilities out there. But to me, the most effective way of witnessing, friends, is one-on-one. You know, we're told to leave the cities, and we're also told to go back into the cities and work them from outposts. Not to live in the cities, but to visit them as Enoch did. Why don't we read the method that Enoch used in witnessing? He did not make his abode with the wicked. He did not locate in Sodom, thinking to save Sodom. He placed himself and his family where the atmosphere would be as pure as possible. Then at times he went forth to the inhabitants of the world with his God-given message. Every visit he made to the world was painful to him. He saw and understood something of the leprosy of sin. After proclaiming his message, he always took back with him to his place of retirement some who had received the warning. Some of these became overcomers and died before the flood came. Also, you'll want to reach the people in the area that you move to. I believe that many people living in rural locations may be even more aware than others that we are rapidly losing our freedoms and liberty, and that end-time events are happening, but they don't quite understand what it means. They seem to live life at a slower pace, and therefore can be more approachable and more receptive. Sometimes it only takes one key word to start up a spiritual conversation. It's a good idea to keep a variety of spiritual books in your car for times such as these. But to some people, the idea of witnessing one-to-one can be uncomfortable and even frightening, and I know that feeling. Some feel they don't know how or what to say. Well, who was the greatest witness this world has ever known? John 7:46 tells what the officers sent by the priests and rulers to arrest Jesus said when they returned without him. They reported, "Never man spake like this man." And the spirit of prophecy amplifies this by saying, "Never man spake like this man because never man lived like this man." Friends, I believe this is the key to real witnessing. If we want to speak like Jesus, we have to live like Jesus. I ask you, which location would be the most conducive to living like Jesus lived? The cities and the suburbs with all the tempting enticements and noise and confusion, or the peaceful, quiet, beautiful countryside and mountains? You know, we're told that Moses went into the wilderness and stayed 40 years, during which time he put away self, and that made room so that he could have the presence of God with him. Let me offer a suggestion. I'm offering it to you because of what it has been doing for me. In the mornings, when we first wake up, my wife and I usually read together aloud in the inspired writings. It's the most inspiring and exhilarating way to start our day. And right now, we're reading through the set of inspired books called Testimonies for the Church. What a tremendous blessing we're getting from these friends. They're helping me to understand the daily details about how to live like Jesus lived. I highly recommend reading or rereading these books, along with the Conflict of the Ages series and, of course, the Bible, now and after you relocate. As you read God's Word in the pure atmosphere of the country or the mountains with a humble and open heart, I guarantee you'll become more aware of the great controversy that is raging around us. And before you know it, you'll have plenty to share with others for the times we live in. One final thought. Watch carefully for God's providences as you decide how to set up your homestead. And remember, God's providences will never go against His written word, friends. Don't confuse Satan's disguises with God's providences. Often when folks are convicted to obey God's instructions and warnings, and they're about to make a change, Satan may present his providences. Don't be surprised if a sudden job offer or promotion or other enticement comes along right as you're attempting to go forward. We face this, and so have others. Here are 2 references you can read to find out how to tell the difference between the two. We're going to end this segment with a wonderful promise you can claim as you choose which route to take in your move. We've been talking about following God's instructions to gain the enormous blessings now that He has in store for us, and also to get ready for the times ahead. I imagine most of you remember the Old Testament story about good King Asa. It's found in 2 Chronicles 14. And during King Asa's reign, the Bible says that for 10 years there was quiet. Wouldn't that be nice to have 10 years of peace? During King Asa's reign, he obeyed God by destroying the signs of idolatry, and also he obeyed God by commanding Judah to seek and obey Him, and also to fear and reverence Him. Isn't that what it's all about, friends? To reverence and fear God. Asa did something else during his reign. He built fenced cities with towers and gates and iron bars. He also trained mighty men of valor. About 580,000 of them. That's a large army. After a while, the Ethiopians came from Egypt to attack King Asa's kingdom. Was King Asa terrified? Let's go to the Spirit of Prophecy and see what Ellen White had to say. I'll be reading from Prophets and Kings, page 110 and 111. I'll be reading excerpts. The faith of Asa was put to a severe test when Zerah the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,300 chariots, invaded his kingdom. In this crisis, Asa did not put his trust in the fenced cities in Judah that he had built with walls and towers, gates and bars, nor in the mighty men of valor in his carefully trained army. The king's trust was in Jehovah of hosts. Setting his forces in battle array, he sought the help of God. From every human viewpoint, the vast host from Egypt would sweep everything before it. But in time of peace, Asa had not been giving himself to amusement and pleasure. He had been preparing for an emergency. He had an army trained for conflict. He had endeavored to lead his people to make their peace with God. And now, although his forces were fewer in number than the enemy, his faith in the one whom he had made his trust did not weaken. Having sought the Lord in the days of prosperity, the king could now rely on him in the day of adversity. And so now, in this time of Earth's history, we're given the opportunity to prepare in a time of relative peace, friends, compared to what's about to happen. Asa had prepared his country spiritually and physically. He had done his part. He had done what he was able to do. So when the crisis came, he had peace of mind that he could rely on God. Over and over, we are told we must first do all we can, then God will do the rest. That's the peace of mind that I want, folks. Don't you? My mind goes back to the first disaster that happened after my family and I left the city and moved to the mountains. I remember calling some friends, and the first thing they asked me was, "Did you hear about the World Trade Center towers coming down?" Well, I hadn't, and it was very shocking to me. But you know, throughout that day, I thought a lot. And I was so thankful for the warnings that God has given us. I was thankful that He helped us move from the city to the mountains, where there's an abundance of water, where there is enough workable land to grow a garden for the times when we can't by ourselves, where there's an ample supply of firewood to keep us warm in the winter, and most of all, where we have our Bibles and our Spirit of Prophecy books to get us through the coming crisis. Finally, I'd like to wrap all this up by saying, friends, you'll never, ever regret following God's warnings. I'm here to tell you that every step that you take, every step that you go forward, God will bring an increase in freedom, liberty, and spiritual blessings to you. And the devil doesn't like it. He'll do what he can to stop you from leaving the cities to receiving these blessings. Let me share just a few examples of the spiritual blessings I and my family have received. When we moved to the mountains, we experienced a detoxification from the world that I didn't know was possible. Our minds have become more clear. The Bible has taken on new meanings. I've enjoyed the Bible since we've moved more than ever. We're closer to nature. And friends, when you're closer to nature, you're closer to God. There is actually a peace that passeth all understanding. I'm learning to trust more in God, to depend on God now before every earthly support is cut off. Friends, it's a real exercise in faith. God will send you adversity. He will allow adversity to happen. Your faith will be exercised, and with His strength, you overcome, and your faith increases, and then it happens again, and it happens again, and you increase in faith, and then you'll be more ready for the coming conflicts. It's like a weightlifter working out. He doesn't just sit around and not get ready for the contest. He works out and exercises his muscles. That's what we're to do with faith. And friends, when you move to the mountains, you'll have that faith exercised and increased, and a tremendous blessing will follow. Many times we have told each other how thankful we are that we have actually made the move. Sometimes I guess it wasn't long after we moved, we just would look at each other and couldn't believe that we had actually done it. That we weren't living in the city. That we didn't have to worry about a crisis happening and us getting trapped in the city. Finally, as you choose to obey God and go forward, you will be following in the path of three very famous men. That would be Moses, Elijah, and Enoch. Now, what did these three men have in common? They spent large amounts of time in the wilderness and in the mountains. And what happened to these men? I think you know the answer. They were all three taken to heaven. Friends, may God bless you as you go forward and embark on your journey.